AI, hype, hysteria, or the great hope for humanity? That's what we're going to be discussing today in our walk around the lake with Ken Cukier, an editor at The Economist. Ken's been thinking deeply and writing about AI long before it was fashionable. So let's go and meet Ken and go to the lake. Hey Ken, welcome back to Ditchley.
James.
Thanks for making the trip.
Absolutely.
Brilliant you could do this. Well, shall we take that walk around the lake?
Let's do it.
Okay, let's do it. So, Ken, let's walk on down. Let's begin. I mean, I don't think I ever asked you this. Why did you decide to write about technology? Why did you, then follow through on AI? What's the story? What got you to that?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. When I was starting out in journalism, I knew I had to specialize in something. All of the grandees who I was working with in the newsroom at the International Herald Tribune in Paris said, hey, if you don't specialize, you don't really offer much to a newspaper. And I was really inspired by some of my spiritual mentors in journalism, like William Shire, who was a journalist actually for a while at the New York Herald Tribune, who went to Berlin, was thrown out before was there in the 30s, was thrown out, expelled in 1942, and ended up writing The Rise and Fall of the Third Reich. And I felt like I needed my own war, but I knew I just wasn't fit to be a war correspondent. That's not my nature. But I was looking for what I felt would be the most momentous change of my lifetime. What would that be? And in the mid-90s, something going on around the world was you could see in business, and then in technology, and then in media, a sort of convergence. And there was something special happening. And eventually the World Wide Web was going to sort of expand, and I realized this is it. I'm going to become a technology journalist. And if I'm going to be in Europe, automatically I can offer something special by doing global international coverage compared to all the journalists in America who would be in Silicon Valley and New York, who are doing what I would consider parochial, which is to say US-focused coverage. So immediately I became the guy who was rest of world, outside the US. And that was distinctive, and that's where I sort of made my first name as a journalist, by plowing into that.
I really love that contrarian choice. You decided that technology was going to be the biggest thing, but you could see it better almost at a bit of distance as to what was going to happen, rather than if you were kind of swept up in the center of Silicon Valley.
Yeah, and I was based in Paris at the time. I loved it as a place to live, but also it meant I was in a different audioscape, right? Speak French.
Yeah.
And it was and it wasn't the most important place. So immediately you had to work harder to understand what was going on in the world, and I could get my sources in America. I'd have my sources in Europe. Certainly in Brussels, there was a lot going on. But also, I always was plugged in with Asia. So I made a commitment early on as a journalist that every article I was going to write about the internet was going to have sources from 3 different continents. Could be Africa, it could be Latin America. But it was going to just mean that anyone reading it saw something different.
Yeah. And taking that on, I mean, you said that, that the technology was going to be the biggest thing, the biggest change you expected to see in your lifetime. And the first wave of that was the internet. And then on top of that, Tim Berners-Lee's World Wide Web. How should we think about AI? I mean, people use all sorts of metaphors. I mean, people have been working in academia on AI, artificial intelligence in various forms since the 1970s, arguably, earlier in the 50s, once the computing age began. But how do you think about it, and how do you kind of place it in these great revolutions in the way that human beings interact with the world? And is it technology? Is it more about the evolution of us? I mean,
well, it's a little bit of both.
Where do you place it?
Yeah, well, it's about both. One of the famous early pioneers, earliest, Norbert Wiener of MIT, he was a mathematician. He was active between the 1930s to 50s, coined the term cybernetics. When he was referring to technologies, he looked at bureaucracies and said a bureaucracy is a technology, right? Anything that is, not of nature, in a sense, but built of man, is a technology. It's a structure that allows us to do more things. So what I was captivated by was the idea that the information society wasn't only a way that we could participate with it, but that it's self-generating information, that it could be used in other ways to do other things. I didn't actually have the language of machine learning, which that would become, in mind, but that arc of AI that you're referring to, in the 1950s, AI was literally what Turing and others had put forward was, can a machine think like a human being? And so the original pioneers were trying to create a software language, basically, or hardware, to replicate how a human mind thinks. Now that showed promise, but it didn't really scale. It didn't really work. So they had to ditch that. But what happened, and a technique at around that time of using data was pushed aside because memory was expensive and and processors were slow and you didn't have a lot of data. They didn't think that was the operative constraint, but it turns out that it was, or one of the constraints. So this great shift that happened about a decade ago, 15 years ago, the concept of big data, was that you can actually invert the way that you create your artificial intelligence by not simply developing something that you sort of program, but that you just give it lots of data and it makes this inference. So is it hyped and overhyped or underhyped is the question. And if this technique is showing so much promise in so many different domains, how can we think about it in terms of the future of humanity? Is this a technology? It is a technology, but it's more than that still, because it's the first technology that comes to what we've always felt was quite almost sacred to human beings, which is our intelligence. It doesn't just improve our brawn, but our brains.
And what's that imitation of human beings? I mean, in the current technologies, do you see that working, that it becomes ever more human-like, or do you think it's bounded by the way it's being approached at the moment, that it can imitate but it can't actually genuinely think things through?
Well, it's philosophical, and so if it's imitation, so the whole world is imitation or representation, right? There is no perfect two, and there is no perfect circle, right? But we actually use 2 + 2 = 4 and know what we mean by that. And these are representations of something else. So if the statistics is highly flawed, but if it brings human beings to the moon and brings them back, then let's accept those statistical flaws, and that's good enough for us. Likewise, is it imitative? Yes, but that's not, I think, the operative optic. It is a form of intelligence, and how interesting to realize that quote unquote intelligence need not be only in human or animal form, right? When people refer to it as artificial intelligence, I think actually a lot of people say, like you, it's like, hey, maybe it's not intelligence. And I think, no, it's not artificial. It actually is intelligence. It's certainly already smarter than we are. After all, it can remember all of Wikipedia, and it can take the whole corpus of any of all the text and recombinate it in a new way. If you will, the Turing test would always fail because you'll always be able to identify that it's a computer, because no human being would be as smart to be able to answer all the questions that you give to it. Exactly.
So it's smarter than us in some ways, I think it's fair to say. In other ways, do you think it's already smarter just objectively across the thing? Well, across the whole range of human questions?
I wouldn't say everything. And I also believe that there's a big difference between a lot of and all of. Okay. In fact, I think those two things are categorically different, and that's what I think the tech bros don't understand. Okay. So I don't think AGI is possible, because I think the G of who we are and what we do is different, special, sacred, in such a way that you'll never have a machine that can do all those things.
The general bit.
The general bit.
The generalized intelligence.
But super intelligence, which is to say, can it go beyond our feeble, imperfect, material-focused minds and see things and come up and concoct ideas that we ourselves not only cannot devise, but can't understand? Absolutely. It already does that. And there's lots of research already that is showing AI, because it has stronger sensors than our eyes, can hear things, can remember things, has already surpassed our cognitive abilities.
Turing test you mentioned. I mean, the Turing test famously says, a machine has passed the test when you can't tell it's not a human being. And many people argue that you can, if you talk to a modern chatbot, in many ways it passes that test. It doesn't yet pass it in full because it's not embodied. I just watched Blake 7, I'm going the wrong sci-fi. I just watched Alien for the first time in ages. I forgot the robot. And the robot is kind of like a messy biological robot rather than a kind of like metal and plastic android. So you can't tell it's a robot. And that, I guess, is the sort of like thing that people think about in the future. If you could embody that intelligence, that chatbot in a sort of biological feeling body, then, you know, would they be a robot? Excuse me, I'm just going to check. Probably not a robot.
You have malfunctioned my circuit.
Okay. We've established you're probably not a robot, which is reassuring because, again, this like problem of mind, we don't know whether, you know, we don't know what is going on actually in someone else's mind. We don't know their thought processes. We always infer that they're like ours, but they may not be.
Yeah.
And in some circumstances, they're definitely not like ours. You know, human beings can be very, very different. So I do think this is a really interesting philosophical question. You know, what does it mean to be an intelligent human being, and what's the core of that?
So there's two elements. For the Turing test, it is first a test of deception. Okay, so it's a little bit narrowed. But then secondly, it reminds me of the era of the automobile versus the horse, where we then needed a metric by which we understood power, and we created the term horsepower. And that made sense when you had an automobile that was replacing the horse. But when you look at a rocket ship going to, or space probe going to Mars, you wouldn't really care about what the horsepower is of those engines.
No,
you
I get you.
but it doesn't make sense. So
Yeah.
the Turing test, once has the reason why no one's talking about it anymore, seriously, is because it's no longer that relevant. It doesn't seem that way, particularly because we've got machines that can do so much more that made it obsolete. On the other hand, when we leave AI from being a piece on silicon and a robot of something of metal that seems to have the instantiation of, dare I say, life, that is made of organic matter, potentially it might self-replicate in ways that it could self-replicate. What then is the thinking in AI circles is that consciousness is substrate independent. That means that it can exist in you and I, in a human form, in the form of biology, but it can also be in any other atom-based thing like silicon. I disagree with that. They just feel like with enough complexity you get there. But they can't prove their argument, I can't prove mine.
Yeah.
It seems to me unlikely, and we could have long discussions about it that I won't bore you with now. But what's interesting is that if AI, as AI moves into biological substrate, it focuses the question no longer on intelligence, but what is life?
Yeah. That's a great discussion. I want to move on, but first, can I compliment you? You will look good on the dance floor. You could do a robot like it's 1984.
Thank you very much. You can see I'm from the era of 1984.
I can indeed. Me too.
Okay,
Me
very
too.
good.
I recognize it.
Yeah.
This is probably one of the most beautiful days I've seen the lake. The sun is not strong, but it's just really bringing out the colors, and I'm really glad you get to see it.
It's sumptuous. It's beautiful.
Yeah.
Now, I know so little about trees. The red one there, with those leaves, which is that?
By a brilliant coincidence, not really because it's bright red, so it's a natural one to focus on. That's the one tree I know for sure. It's a liquid amber, is its sort of popular title. Every year it has this really, as you said, sumptuous deep red, and you can see it reflected in the lake as well.
I've got to ask these questions. Sorry, I'm a journalist. Always curious. Was this landscaped or was this natural?
It's interesting you ask about the lake. It originally would have been, we think, a series of fish ponds for the medieval mansion. That's where most of them, you can see it's a valley, and they would have, fished in them and have been part of the kind of food source of the estate. And then into the 18th century, when the earliest pictures we have, the lake is more formal. It's almost more like a canal. It looks in places, but it's getting picturesque and and more naturalistic around the edges. And what we're standing on is a dam, and that's obviously not natural at all. But if behind us there's a second dam to fill the valley, which is exactly what Capability Brown did. And Capability Brown did all of the lakes around here, allegedly here, but we have no paperwork, so we don't know. But what we do know is they tried to build a Capability Brown lake. And the reason why that didn't work and this dam was built was discovered in the 1930s, when they thought that actually would be more beautiful. And so they opened the dam and let the water flood up to the further dam at the end of the valley. And everyone was sort of thinking, this is going to be great. This is going to be an amazing improvement to Ditchley. And they woke up in the morning and they got a call from the police because 2 miles away or something like that, a whole cow yard on a farm had flooded as the contents of Ditchley's lake bubbled up through some unknown water system.
Oh, how
So we don't know
interesting.
it's there, but it was, that's why they couldn't do this. So I like to think that that Capability Brown perhaps did do this, but he didn't get paid. There we go. Ken, so everyone wants to talk about the risks of AI. Everyone loves the kind of, the robot gone rogue, the HAL computer from 2001 Space Odyssey. I want to start on what could a good outcome look like? I mean, what should we be optimistic about? What could you see flowing from this crazy race that could really change outcomes for people?
Yeah.
Just across the board, health, work, let's be really optimistic. What can come from this? What should we be striving for?
Totally. I mean, I think it's also it's within our reach.
Yeah.
Let's remember it's artificial intelligence, and intelligence sort of marks so much of the aspects of our society that we find that is actually the mark of civilization, if you will, because it allows us to do more things and to cast off diseases, travel, trade, and live fulfilling and prosperous lives. Just think about what the world was like 200, 400 years ago for most people. They found fulfillment in smaller joys, like having childhood, mortality rates, where children would live rather than perish, famously. And so now we've avoided many of those same problems, whether it's famines or disease. And so I believe we have that same possibility to reimagine our society in very beneficial ways. The first one is going to be in energy. We're going to use AI to create a greater abundance of energy and clean energy than before. And once you have clean energy, a lot of other things fall into place. So,
That's important. If I could just interrupt you, because most people talk a lot about how much energy AI will use, but you see it balancing the scale.
yeah, totally. I mean, everyone is going to be stunted into the ever eternal now, which they know. And it takes a very deliberate attempt to resist that, to sort of shuck that off and think to reframe what you know into what is possible and what is different. And it's not natural in the same way that I don't think reason comes naturally to us, but we've been on a project of civilization for the last, you could maybe say, 4,000 years, right, of sort of taking our intellect and our passions and our appetites and tamping down that id and ego into the superego and to the sense of applying our intelligence and our reason and thoughtfulness to create all the splendor that we have. You've got a beautiful manor house that is 3-4 stories tall. That was not possible around the year 1000, but it was possible around the year 1600. What had changed? Well, architecture, right? And so the sciences, engineering. So we're going to be using AI to do that same sort of transformation, and it's probably going to happen sooner than we think. Maybe not in our lifetimes if it's in 30 years, but certainly in 50 or 100 years, provided humanity lasts that long, we'll be able to, I believe we'll have clean and abundant energy, and that's just table stakes. Of course, everyone points to taking data that already exists.
Well, what about distribution? Because you said people are beyond kind of like famine and basic problems. And that's true of the kind of industrialized world to a large degree. There are exceptions, but obviously it's not true everywhere. I mean, do you see, you talked about abundant energy. I mean, what about this getting distributed? How does it benefit people across the planet?
Well, your distribution's not energy distribution, but about the
Yeah, in a
the
general
prosperity,
sense.
the wealth that
Yeah.
distribution. Those are choices that human beings have to make, and if they choose to have a system of society that rewards just a handful of people at the top and immiserates
Yeah.
everyone else,
Yeah.
that's possible, right? Capitalism, 200 years ago, was giving rise to that. Karl Marx and
Yeah.
Engels and others, said, hey, there's an alternative, which was state control of the resources, and that wasn't right either. We've fought wars, certainly a Cold War, about that. But if you look at the welfare state that was created in, between around the 1930s in America, and certainly in the 1950s in Britain and elsewhere,
Yeah.
it was able to sort of have capitalism with a human face. It
Yeah.
was to temper off those rough edges. Now it looks like, because of a variety of reasons, that we're going back to a time that looks closer to the Gilded Age than
Yeah.
to the I like Ike, middle 20th century prosperity.
Capital does better than labor, you mean?
Exactly.
In that kind of model.
But those are choices. Those are human choices that we have to make. There's nothing sort of inherent in the technology, or in society for that matter, that's going to lead to the outcome of this hyper distribution in which you have a handful of wealthy people and a great mass of people that don't have that. If we could simply slide the ruler, if you will, or the slide,
Yeah.
the slider, the chart, to distribute more prosperity to people.
But how do you distribute prosperity? I mean, at the moment, we give people money in a capitalist system, at least, for work. Some of the fears about AI are that it will destroy jobs faster than new jobs could be created, or that the new jobs that created will not have the same qualities of pride and dignity and fulfillment that current jobs have. Now, I have to say I'm personally skeptical about the attributes of that kind of some of the current jobs, but what's the positive story on AI and work then as part of this scenario you're describing? How do we keep people satisfied in a sort of busy sense? I've got important work to do. I've got things I've got to do.
Totally.
How do we make that happen? I mean, we're trying to get to this positive story, but if we
Yeah.
could look at that bit. What's your head on this? It's really
totally. Well,
easy to knock yourself out.
Yeah, I wish I had the height with which I had to watch myself. I don't even have to duck.
That would have
Walk
got.
right
That
through.
one would have got you. Don't do yourself down. That one would have definitely got you.
Thank you. Good.
Yeah.
I think we've made it. So, first, on a distributional level, most of the things that people care about in life, you could imagine AI taking away the anxiety over. So if it's healthcare, whether it's education, whether it's transport, whether it's housing, to me it's mystifying why we wouldn't be using AI not for universal basic income, but the idea of universal basic services like making transport free. Maybe not everything, but certainly in a municipal area, without a doubt. Making healthcare free and super high quality, right? Feeling a strange, feeling in your stomach or a lump on, at 7 in.the morning and going into your doctor's at 8:30, and then finding out in the afternoon at 3:30 what you need to do. So I see that those are all the positives that this abundance can afford for ordinary people, if that was our choice. And I think that will be. I think that's where things are going to go.
Yeah.
But for jobs and for meaning, it depends. I don't think that we're going to have the jobs are all going to change, but I don't think it's going to be a complete obliteration. If you think about what jobs looked like, say around 1890, well, certainly 1850, almost everyone was involved in agriculture. Certainly 1800. Then by 1900, before electrification and household appliances, etc., became commonplace, many people worked longer and harder over dreary tasks. And if you were to say, I'm going to take 90% of your task and make it easier for you to do, because we're going to give an electric motor to it, whether it's a dishwasher, clothing, transport with a car, you would imagine, like Keynes did when he wrote his famous essay about 100 years ago, that he predicted that in this year, thereabouts, that people would be working 15 hours a day. And of course, the joke is that everyone's working, or 15 hours a week. And the joke is everyone's working,
15
80
hours a day.
Yeah, actually, everyone's working 15 hours a day. No, quite right, exactly right. On the other hand, let's not forget, you and I are working right now. Now, yeah, this is
My mother would dispute that. She would not accept that this is work.
Thank you. Well, that's just my point, right?
Yeah.
That, as the Dire Straits song goes, that ain't working.
Yeah.
That's the way you do it, right? So many of the jobs that certainly white-collar professionals are doing today, which will definitely change and be crimped, and maybe some will go away because of AI, are things that they're being paid for, but their grandparents would hoot and holler, either laugh or cry, depending on their disposition, that they were actually being paid for it. And so I think that is, and also many people are working past the quote-unquote retirement age because they love what they do. They chose the career rather than the career chose them based on their father's birth. So because of that, I feel that it's overblown to say we're going to be having this jobs apocalypse. I do think that we'll be working as much as people want to work, and some will be working more than others. And you might even have the people who are with the more wealth and more cognitive endowment working more than others would be doing. But I think they're going to be doing it because they're going to like what they do, and it will unleash new forms of creativity. I don't think that there is a fixed amount of work to go around, the lump of labor fallacy, or a lack of need of human ingenuity and creativity with which to apply this tool of AI and point it at this problem and that problem and that problem.
Yeah, I get what you mean about there are lots of tasks which there's an annoying sort of drudgery element. And if you can take that away, then hopefully you can free up more time for the higher level of the task. We'll get onto the risks a bit later on, but that sounds promising. Healthcare, you said, sort of healthcare made much more accessible because of breakthroughs in science, I guess, that will flow from this.
Yeah.
From the combination of AI and biology.
Let's start with the idea that we practice healthcare. I don't even think healthcare is a science right now.
Yeah.
So it's think of it a little bit like the medieval scribes before there was printing, or think of it more like a caveman dabbing paint on a wall compared to what would then become the Sistine Chapel.
Yeah.
Just one small example. You go to...
Sorry, doctors.
Exactly.
You are cavemen, apparently.
Yeah, totally.
At the moment.
But they know
barber
that.
surgeons, they know that.
Yeah,
they know that.
But they know that. They probably had a view of what healthcare was going to be when they were starting out in their profession or deciding in high school to move in that direction. They're carers after all, and then see what the world looks like and what they're doing. And they're just befuddled that the system works as it does. The most important is data and the lack of data.
Yeah.
As one example, I think it's crazy that we have a society in which I have to feel something wrong with me to then present myself to a clinic to then get a diagnosis. Why am I not getting a diagnosis every single day when I flush my toilet and it's doing biopsies of my biofluids in all the different ways that it can? And therefore, knowing something about, because it's doing it at a population scale, knowing something about the progression of disease so it can find markers in the earliest stages, changing my diet.
This is a really interesting question, though. I mean, because I asked you about an optimistic thing, and you're a person driven by, really interested in data, wants to know more data. A lot of people would prefer not to know too much about where they're heading. People could do genetic tests now and try and find out what their diseases they're going to get. Logically, everyone should do that. It ups your chances, but people don't want to do that. So what's the AI world going to be like for people who don't want to know?
People don't want to know because there's nothing you can do about it if you find out you have this predisposition.
Yeah.
But in the future that I'm describing, when you find out you have this predisposition, they say, it is clear that you have this awful, horrible tendency for this despicable disease.
Yeah.
Don't worry about a thing, it'll be gone in 2 weeks. Take this.
Because in the future
swallow
there's
this.
more treatments you can do this and do.
Because and also if that doesn't exist and the person doesn't want to know, the society and the medical profession can accommodate that.
Yeah.
Surely, you don't have to be informed of something that you don't want to know about.
Yeah. Okay. Great. Okay. So that doesn't sound so bad. We should look forward to it. we should expect if there's a bubble that bursts, it'll bounce back because the underlying value is incredibly strong. Fantastic. Well, we could almost cut the walk short there. I think we're in a good place.
Yeah, sadly, we are not able to cut the walk short there because there's the other side of the coin.
I knew you wanted to go there. All right, let's pause for a moment and then we'll pick that up. As you know, Ken, this is what we call the rotunda, but is essentially a folly, which I think, if I'm right, that Americans call an eye catcher. Is that true?
I would have called it a rotunda, but sure.
Okay, but the general class of objects you would call follies, or?
I'm not of the manner born, so I only know it as a rotunda.
You don't have a folly?
Not yet. I've got a folly, but that's a different kind of folly.
Oh, okay,
Exactly.
Okay, good. Well, look, I thought it would be a great place to come and talk about the current constraints on AI. You know, how fast is it going to be? Where are we going to get to? By when? So let's dive into that. Yeah, so let's talk about this current moment in AI. There are obviously two types of race going on. The first race is between the companies. You know, who is going to win through? Who could get a decisive advantage, which could roll into other aspects of their hyper-scaled businesses? I mean the big American tech platforms for the most part. The second race is happening within China, again a race within the companies, but also between China and the US. That's producing these racing dynamics, but it does feel like there are a lot of constraints to current models, and as we scale up, it gets harder and harder. What's your best assessment? And warning everyone, this could get a bit technical, but we'll try and make it as clear as possible. Ken's brilliant at that. Ken?
Hardly. Yeah, I don't think it needs to be technical at all, interestingly. So one constraint, of course, are the chips. And so there's high-end chips from NVIDIA today there's a degree of export control on those chips, but that seems to be at least in flux because now it seems like they're able to be sent to China as well. Once you have the chips, you also need the algorithms and the fine-tuning of the algorithms, the sort of tweaking of it, as well as the models themselves and the know-how of applying the advanced techniques to create more data, to have more data, to create new models with the high-end chips. And of course, you need the energy to power all of that. So you need big data centers. We're still at the outset of understanding how there's no science of AI. It's not a science, it's an engineering problem, if you will. So what the difference?
A craft almost?
Yeah, exactly. It's a craft. It's an arts and crafts, not a science. So a lot of this is experimentation in real time, using the known techniques to advance the state of the art to do something different. And that's why we're seeing all this progress, because people are just experimenting, doing new things, taking certain data out, more likely putting more data in. The whole very nature of the LLMs, the large language models, was created by accident, if you will, when they were running a model and they did the runtime at a far, far longer amount of time, not realizing that the neural network was creating more connections than before, and what seemed to be sort of an embroidery of a beautiful tapestry turned out to be the Bayeux tapestry when you had enough of the embroidery complexity in it. And so that was one reason why the LLMs, I guess about 3 years ago, from OpenAI.
Because we still don't understand what's going on in the deeper layers of LLMs, do we? We've sort of done what they call mechanical analysis of the top, but we don't understand the mathematics. It's all mathematics.
Yes.
Am I right? But we don't really understand the mathematics below those very top layers.
That's exactly right. And also what we are getting better at doing, what the industry is getting better at doing, is sort of taking a snapshot of at each increment, at each layer, if you will, and then trying to understand, sort of reverse engineering with your intellect and your eyes, what has happened and why things have turned out the way that it has. But that still is a very, it's not scientific, it's a observational way of trying to suss out what is happening without actually knowing what's happening. So that's not a showstopper for the output, right? Or what it does mean is that we don't have a theory of causality around how the AI works. And why we care about that, for example, is if you have a medical device that squirts a little bit of insulin or adjusts your pacemaker based on lots of different factors so that it works better, and it's doing things without you being able to show a device regulator why it made the decision that it did. And for 1 of 1,000 people, it's going to it's going to function the way it's supposed to function, but that is a malfunction, and you didn't know that because you didn't have a theory, because you didn't have the ability to say it will always do this and never do that, like you would if you hand code it in.
So what is this like uncertainty about what's going on? This, you know, we have snapshots, but not a complete picture. What does that do for this pursuit of alignment, correctness, elimination of hallucinations, which all mean the tendency to make shit up?
Yes.
Sorry for the language, but to make shit up. What does that mean?
For low stakes stuff, get over it, right? Use the technology and have a lot of fun.
Don't worry. It's like
for low stakes stuff, if you're going to write if you're going to write an email, a marketing email for 10,000 customers that you belong to, like, use it. And if it's not exact, or you don't know how the image was created, and you put weird things into it, 6-fingered image, etc., it doesn't matter, right? But if you're going to use it for something that's quite important, then it does matter. And so in the case of hallucinations, just to say one element, that's just a feature of how the system works, because the system is simply not giving you the answer, it is giving you what it thinks a correct answer looks like. It's multiple layers of abstraction away from the thing itself. Elsewhere. So what you would want there is a human in the loop to look at it, but not look at it with a traditional 20th century view of, is this right or wrong, but a 21st century mindset that we're not trained to do, to really scrutinize it and say, I'm not going to take for granted. These errors are a form of error that I've not seen before, because it's an alien intelligence and an alien error, it's AI. So I need to sort of develop my scrutiny in a new way to look at it and say, is this right? Does this correspond to ground truth or not? We are bad at this today. We're going to get better at it in a couple of years. Okay,
so we'll get better at that and work through those things. What about the energy constraints? We've touched on this already about AI saving energy potentially, but at the moment we need, according to the company's own predictions, massive data centers, and massive data centers need huge multiple city amounts of energy. Do you see that being the bottleneck? We just run out of available power and water, by the way, as well. They need lots. At the moment, they need lots of water as well.
In economics, these things are artificial. The reason why they need so much energy is because they've decided to have a pricing model that's free and all you can eat, right? All they have to do is slap on a small little price to it, and you'd see consumption decline a little bit. Right? Now, people are still using it, and people can still use it. But if they were to pay the actual cost, right, you might see them using it in a much more careful way, and you would have less silly videos.
It looks like we've got someone doing aerobatics if we want to know what the noise in the background is, rather than the particularly large lawnmower. But that's what's happening. So it's an economic function of the racing. So the companies are giving it away for free to get more data from users, more interaction, and to establish market share, and that's why they're spending so much money.
Yes. Now, of course,
but the actual sort of money itself is those data centers. You think are going to stay needed for how long?
Well, so. If history is a guide, we saw the bandwidth that was created during the dot-com gold rush was also a bandwidth bonanza, and we used a lot of it. But by the year 2001, where the internet economy had shrunk because of the dot-com bust, there was a lot of stranded assets, and some of them sold for very little, but those assets were still useful. Now, the chips might not have the same lifespan as, say a railway bridge during the railway boom, or the bandwidth, the unlit fiber optics during the bandwidth bonanza, but it's still valuable insofar as it's a data center next to an energy source. It does use a lot of data, but keep in mind, there's models that are coming out that uses less data. You yourself know and make the point in other instances that edge AI, where the edge computer, where the models are on the device, will use a lot less, where you're not bringing it out to the data center.
We're in the
among
middle of
others.
a ladybird swarm. I suddenly see us come our way as the sun's come out. So if we're sort of looking like we're waving our hands in the air, there is a reason.
Exactly.
It's the ladybirds attacking us. But just let's bear with the ladybirds just for one more question. Data. So AI, there's a lot of controversy about copyright, about platforms, AI platforms taking people's data, people's product to train systems. And we've got a very kind of like uneven picture emerging where in some cases they're doing licensing deals and in other cases they're just taking it, which I think is legally going to end up in trouble. We'll see where that goes. But there's this bigger point about, are we going to run out of quality data to train these things? And what does synthetic data, data made by AI mean, and what does that go? How do you view this data? When we first started talking about data and big data several years ago, what do you think about the data issue here?
Yeah, so I think it's really pretty essential. Using this AI derivative information as a new data source is like the serpent swallowing its tail, or drinking one's own bathwater. I think it's quite bad. The model might not necessarily quote unquote depreciate because of it, but it will create answers that are going to be farther and farther from ground truth, from the thing itself, and hallucinations will be far more prone, but also an irreality will be far more prone.
Yeah.
But remember that one of the reasons why the early versions, I'm thinking three years ago, of OpenAI's LLM, large language model, worked so well is because it used all the data it could possibly find in order to, by data, I should say words, corpuses of words, whether it was Twitter, Wikipedia, 4chan, scientific journals, and put it all together. By doing so, it was able to create replies that were just so lifelike and human-like. It was fantastic. But I would imagine, and I'm sure it's already happened, I don't know this for sure, but if you were to just take that exact same data corpus and pull out all the, pardon my French, shit, we'll say, and get rid of the 4chan, get rid of the Twitter, get rid of all the bad things, could that model improve with less data but higher quality data?
Yeah.
I would bet it would.
You bet it would.
And certainly for certain uses it would. So the Financial Times and my own beloved Economist have AI systems. The Economist isn't yet public. The FT's one is, in which we allow readers to query our database to generate our own articles, our archive, to generate new information based on what they want to know, the answer they want to know. And it works very well, but it's highly tuned to, it has more than just their own archives in it in order to be a functioning model. But if it's levered on their archive, it will produce answers that they feel more confident in. And I think that's the direction things will go in. Do you want me to pull the ladybug away from your shoulder right now? Nope, stop. Done.
Thank you very much.
You're
That's
welcome.
good. They can bite.
Oh, really? Okay.
No, they can't.
Okay.
They're done. But that's good. I think pulling on some of these threads is going to take us into the next part of our discussion, next part of our walk, where things may get a little darker, but hopefully we can do it in a kind of balanced way.
Let's do it.
Now the aircraft stops. Ken, so we've talked about the philosophy behind this, how you got into this. We've talked about optimistic scenarios, the racing conditions we've got now and the constraints over them. As we touched on earlier, there is a sort of darker side to this, and I don't mean just the kind of fears of rogue AI. In fact, personally, I think that's the last thing we should be worrying about right now, because there are other things which are more urgent and worry. Let's talk about that. What are the risks, and what can we do about them? But let's start by identifying what you see from all the conversations you've had, all the thinking you've done, as the actual risks that are first up, as it were.
Sure. Yeah, I don't think it's rogue AI. I think it's more like rogue people using AI.
Yeah.
And so you could imagine it could amplify bad people to do bad things, whether it's,
Give me an example of bad things. What sort of bad things do you think are realistic?
Yeah, a terrorist who creates a toxin that goes into society, into a country, as a way of sowing terror in that area. There's, the idea there had been 20 years ago of a dirty bomb, of a dirty nuke, and you could just imagine that you don't need to. You don't need to have a nuclear weapon. You could have a bioweapon, or you could have some other sort of weapon that would be created with the help of AI that you couldn't have done before.
I'm always a bit skeptical about that one because the Poisoner's Handbook, for example, recipes to make anthrax, ricin, have been on the internet for years and years and years, and you can go into libraries and find these things. How will AI? I mean, AI is not creating new stuff here. It's helping, at least not yet. It's helping you get to the right research. How will that help? Just unpack that for me.
Yeah, so it is based on, I agree with you that it does seem implausible, but a lot of times these things seem implausible until it happens. Then it seems like, oh, it's always been open in,
Fair point.
Yeah, open in plain sight. So researchers have identified that you can use AI to identify many, many novel antibacterial antibiotics, if you will. And so they also were able to use that same technology to create novel pathogens and toxins that didn't have any known antidote. And so they published one set of research, but not the other. But they actually tried to do it, and it was coming up with things. So you could imagine that it would be a pathogen that we didn't know about before. There would be no sort of antidote to it. That would be made with in a very simplistic manner with very simplistic materials, chemical materials, and it would just be dispersed in a very in water, for example, the water system. So I don't think it's not the highest on my list actually, but it's not one that I would say is zero.
What's your highest?
My highest is are you ready? It's defense technology, AI weaponry, that gets brought into law enforcement and will be part of ordinary domestic policing without police forces having the competence with which to manage these extraordinary weapons. So I could imagine a surveillance drone that is armed, that would be great for crowd control, that would also be great for public security and safety, but it can be misused in the wrong hands.
Yeah, I have to say personally, I'm worried about drone swarms. So drone swarms, I mean, but you know what I mean.
Yeah.
Drones that are coordinated by AI to work as one, but can be multiplied. At the moment, you've seen this in Ukraine where pilots are piloting multiple drones, but they're doing it in a human way. But the AI automation of that is actually not very complicated, is almost here. And we've seen some good examples of what that could kind of look like. The famous one in Ukraine of crates open, drones fly out, attack targets. You can imagine that as a terrorist attack. If you scale it up, you can imagine it as a new form of weapon of mass destruction, certainly a weapon of mass terror on that. I mean, how serious and close do you feel like that kind of technology is?
I'm surprised it hasn't happened already. It's that close. I mean, you interestingly, you have to pussyfoot your way around that it's almost there. It's not almost there. As you know, it's there.
Yeah.
Right. The problem is very subtle. The small drones that actually work as in swarms don't have the lift and power to put a strong ordnance on it, and it doesn't have the battery life with which it can actually go at a farther distance. So it's not been used in warfare yet, but that's yet, and it's not been used in domestic terrorism yet, but again, it's yet. So I think we will, if the solution to AI is going to be AI, the solution to offensive drones are going to be defensive drones. We're already seeing that in
swarming defensive drones.
Totally. The drone wall, which has been floated around to protect Europe, which of course what's so interesting about that is like, yes, it's a no-brainer, but it also sounds like the Maginot Line, which is it's right for today. It might not be right for tomorrow. There's no reason not to actually do that.
It's also hard to have it everywhere, I guess, like the Maginot Line, because you can't put drone walls all over, or can you? That feels very expensive to have drones sitting around in their tens of thousands waiting for other drones that might never arrive.
Well, that's totally true. I mean, you'd ideally want to have a dual use purpose of the drone. So you could imagine surveillance drones that are also meteorological equipment, right? Or just border security for immigration, whatever you want your values to be. But at the same time, it also has a defensive function. And then if it's a problem, the rest of the swarm lifts up. It's a little sentinel, if you will. And then you could also imagine that if you purchased it correctly, and public procurement for weaponry is abysmal, but if you did it, it would be extensible. So you would buy it today, but it would be flexible and open enough that you'd be able to modify it for the next 5 years. So it's not a distressed asset.
It's not just a distressed asset. Yeah. Look, let's those are two of the sort of most frightening scenarios for negative outcomes from this, which is novel biological weapons enabled by AI. Let's call a spade, or drone technology turned into a new and very effective form of attack and hopefully defense too, as the natural response. But what about the societal consequences that people worry about? I mean, let's start with a term which feels particularly doom-laden to me, which is jobless growth. We talked earlier on about how there's labour and capital and it's a human choice, but very often markets tend to prioritise capital. That's their structure.
Yep.
AI is making people more efficient. We're starting to see people think, maybe I need fewer people. And if I expand my business, I could hire more, but I'm not going to hire more now.
Yeah.
What is the negative aspect on jobs? You didn't think it was going to be a jobs apocalypse, but how bad could it get for graduates, people leaving universities, or how bad for people leaving school? Or do you think the hit will be on the more elderly because they can't, those more advanced in years because they can't adapt quick enough? What do you reckon?
No one really knows, but I think it's going to hit both categories. So the older people who don't have skills in AI are going to be vulnerable and they're going to be pushed out, but they might own property. And so, as we know, if they're if the older the individual, probably that they have some resources to weather that. Not perfect, but something. The younger people are going to be hurt because, of course, you probably don't need very inexperienced people. If you have AI, you have someone in the mid category who knows something. They're inexpensive in the labor force, and they can actually then use AI and they've the skills to develop it. However, what will happen to those young creative people? They're also empowered by AI. Now, it's difficult for us to imagine what jobs they might do, but I can imagine something that looks a little bit more artisanal in the workplace. Consultancies that are very small, that are looking at branding of a great product that is made by robots in a factory that doesn't have to be in China anymore to make something inexpensively in a factory. It could actually be around the corner from you because it's made with robots, right? And with the materials. And this could be synthetic materials, but it seems genuine. So I could imagine an economy that looks a little bit more artisanal rather than where people are able to have jobs and fulfilling jobs. But I would agree with you also that that's very difficult. It requires a lot of initiative and ambition of the individual. It also will require a lot of social skills. And there, I think it's curious that you have a generation of people who are now at university and entering the workforce that don't have those same social skills because they've spent all of their hours on a screen, intermediated interactions, rather than talking to real people. Now, of course, I'm wildly generalizing for my own children.
Yes. Sorry, young people.
But it's okay.
For the wild generalizations.
But but young people are telling me this as well. So it's coming from them. I'm just reflecting their own words. Yeah. So I think that those are the skills that are going to be needed, and maybe there will be people who will be.
Sorry, I'm really sorry to interrupt. I just want to show you. I get fascinated by these fungal ecosystems, and since living here, I've learned that there's kind of whole worlds of creatures in old tree trunks, particularly old oak trees, and they create kind of like incredible structures like this, which return every year, and then disappear in the summer and come back.
And I'm going to eat this, and I'll either hallucinate like AI, or I'll be dead.
You might have a delicious meal. You might hallucinate. That's also possible. Or there is the death possibility. I don't know. I mean, what I have learned is that you have to be really careful with fungi.
Okay.
So don't eat anything you can't positively identify. And I've also learned that identifying stuff can be really difficult.
Okay.
So basically, I still buy mushrooms from the supermarket.
Very good.
I don't trust my knowledge in any sense
foraging. Yeah,
sense
exactly.
whatsoever. So, look, I think I said what I was about risk, but two sort of positive things that emerge from this, which I think lead us into our sort of final conversation, is when you bring all these things together, where are we? What should we do? And what's a balanced view look like for the average person who is thinking about this, who is not invested in the industry particularly, but feels they might be impacted by it? And what's the right approach for countries? But just two things you said. I mean, one is that I agree with you on this. AI offers a spectacular future for people coming out of universities if they can master the basic skills of working with it, because it turns everyone into a computer programmer. There are problems with it. There'll be mistakes and so on. But it allows you to, I think, to move forward at great speed and very, very low cost in turning your ideas into software, at least, and increasingly tying that with some hardware too. That can have good and bad things, but if you've got good intentions, it could be amazing in terms of impact on the world and your own personal success. And then the other thing I think you said is that people who are older, who are worried about this, they actually have this incredible store of knowledge that I think can be really amplified and made useful by AI if they can work with it. It does feel pretty clear that unless you're in some unique creative niche or in some physical job, then at some point quite soon you're going to start to feel the effects of AI. Is that right? Am I right about thinking of it happening in stages, but in the end broadly across the economy?
Well, yes, definitely. In stages and broadly across the economy, without a doubt. So what can you do? If the AI is good at so many things, one thing that a human being can do is be human, right? Lean into your humanity, which is interacting with others, seeing the world in a novel way, finding things that are very true to you, the sort of the ground truth of that which is, and reimagining it for what could be. AI is very good at, it's a simulation, right? As we've talked about before. So it's very good at taking what is and then recreating and replicating it and replicating it in new ways. In some ways, it goes beyond what we're trying to do. So, for example, it can identify eye disease in retina scans better than eye doctors can. But keep in mind, the eye disease was known before, right? We actually have a term for it. We can articulate it. It's in books. We know what some markers are. We knew to get data of retina scans for the eye disease, and we weren't looking at something else, right? But of course, AI might tell us, actually, there's a DNA component. We didn't know about it, and we learned it. But there was someone who took the tool and focused it, that little laser beam, if you will, metaphorically speaking, and focused it and said, let's look at this with that, right? Let's take AI and put it there. So lean into being a human being and developing relationships with other people, imagining the world in a new way, and applying the technology to real human needs that I actually believe are far larger than the stunted world that we live in now, in which we imagine where we're sort of we've imagined ourselves into a prison cage, whether it is with how we structure our healthcare. Education is relatively unchanged since Plato's Academy, right? And so basically Aristotle. But so in other words, you still have a sage on a stage, and you have little pupils who are dutifully looking. And although we've tried to put Zoom on it and AI, it hasn't really worked. In fact, it's not working at all. We still have one teacher for 30 kids. Why wouldn't we have 30 teachers for one kid? Now that's probably not the right ratio, but it says, let's reframe it. Let's think about it differently. right? Why don't we should be teaching, I mean, we do say we should be teaching social skills, we should be doing that, but you could imagine a whole infrastructure of support around the child rather than just leaving them off to their own devices with one person teaching assistant. And so that's how I see the world unfolding by getting the benefits of AI for all those things in which we can use it for, but also becoming better at being human beings.
Yeah. The better at human beings thing strikes me, and this may sound a bit kind of pious and over the top to say, but I do hope that if a machine is going to be better at us than a lot of things, our response to that won't be despair to say, I've lost my meaning, I'm no longer so good at doing this kind of piece of work. But instead to kind of think, well, actually that's fine because they weren't really the things we should have been measuring ourselves by anyway. We should have been measuring ourselves by, how helpful a human being we were to other human beings and what our relationships like, and were we a good father, brother, sister, mother, or a person in society, and value people more for that than their mechanical capabilities at the end of the day to get this much work done or to do this much coding in a day. Let's and within work, let's value the person who had the great idea and was able to take that forward as well, but also the people who kind of make the team work and support them. So I do think there is something we might get from this which is positive. And that's probably why we both like talking about this subject. We view it positively, but I strongly think you're an optimist on this, right? Where do you? As we sum it up, as I started, hype, hysteria, hope. I mean, where do you come down on what mix there should be?
So let me play back to what you've just said, and maybe that's the summing up to say, which is, we can imagine our lives as having resume virtues and eulogy virtues. And the resume virtues is all of our striving and all of our gongs, and we went to this school and we got this promotion and we've got this title.
Yeah.
And the eulogy virtues are probably much more meaningful. Actually, not probably. They are much more meaningful. They are what gave us our lives meaning. They are what we accomplished in our short time here that others will remember us by, that has more weight and depth. And certainly when we shuffle our mortal coil, all of those resume virtues are meaningless to that which was marking our time, the eulogy virtues. And I think AI is really good at the resume virtues. And will AI be very good at the eulogy virtues? I don't think so. But will they help us become better versions of ourselves for those eulogy virtues? I do think that that's the case. If we can temper the risks well and use our wisdom and our humanity to ensure that we shape these tools around our values.
Thanks, Ken. That's great. I don't really have much more to add, but thanks. Brilliant you could come. Ken Cukier, thinker, writer, very deep thinker on AI and its implications. Thanks for that walk.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. This was great.
Let's get some lunch.
Let's do it. Mushrooms.
Not mushrooms.
Not mushrooms.
It might be.
Okay.
I hope not.
Good.